Szanowni Państwo, chciałabym Państwa poinformować, że w materiałach, które otrzymaliście w papierowych torbach, są tłumaczenia wszystkich tekstów, więc jeżeli ktoś potrzebuje zajrzeć do tłumaczeń, część będzie opowiadana w języku angielskim, więc tam znajdziecie Państwo polskie tłumaczenia tych materiałów. I no cóż, na wstępie poproszę o pierwsze słowo pana burmistrza miasta Malborka, pana Marka Harzewskiego.
Panie pośle, panie i panowie przedstawiciele ambasad, panie konsulu, dyrektorzy muzeów i jednostek kultury, panie pułkowniku, samorządowcy na czele z panem starostą, panie wójcie, panie przewodniczący, panie burmistrzu zaprzyjaźnionego miasta Monheim, szanowni państwo. Państwa pobyt tu jest dla nas wielkim zaszczytem i wielką radością, a zarazem znakiem, jak ważne jest wspólne mierzenie się z trudną historią. Jesteśmy Europejczykami, sąsiadami. Wspólnie żyjemy w sercu Europy, a na nasze wzajemne kontakty i relacje wpływ ma zarówno wielowiekowa wymiana kulturowa, ale niestety również wojny, przemoc i tragedie ludzi z tym związane. Od kilku lat na cmentarzu komunalnym w Malborku stoi pomnik poświęcony Stalagowi 20B. Pomnik upamiętnia wszystkich jeńców Stalagu, ale wiedza o życiu jeńców, o życiu jenieckim jest nadal powszechnie niewielka i wymaga uzupełnienia. Dlatego Muzeum Miasta Malborka realizuje przypomnienie historii Stalagu poprzez wystawę. Przypomina o jenieckim życiu ludzi pragnących wolności, którym tę wolność odebrano. To spotkanie z historią to również okazja do refleksji nad złem, którego doświadczyli wszyscy, którzy byli osadzeni w Stalagu. Byli to przedstawiciele różnych narodowości, różnych kultur, Polacy, Brytyjczycy, Francuzi, Włosi, Belgowie, Serbowie, Rosjanie. Mam nadzieję, że ta wystawa, a właściwie jestem przekonany, że ta wystawa pozwoli nam upamiętnić te osoby. Pozwoli nam również na dialog związany z trudną historią. Ten dialog spowoduje, że wyciągniemy wnioski na przyszłość, zrozumiemy, jak wielkim nieszczęściem dla każdej społeczności, dla każdego narodu, dla każdego kraju jest wojna. Szanowni Państwo, tak jak mówiłem, pomnik Stalagu istnieje już od kilku lat, natomiast wiedza jest o tym jenieckim życiu bardzo skromna. Dlatego chciałem bardzo serdecznie podziękować Muzeum Miasta Malborka na czele z panią dyrektor Dorotą Raczkowską za kolejną wystawę dotyczącą historii naszego miasta. Ta wystawa akurat dotyczy bardzo trudnej historii. Moje szczególne podziękowania kieruję do pani kurator wystawy, pani Beaty Grudzieckiej, za jej zaangażowanie, za olbrzymią pracę, którą włożyła i za kontakty z rodzinami, które miały jeszcze możliwość wspomóc tą wystawę poprzez czy przekazanie, czy udostępnienie pamiątek po swoich rodzinach. Tu dziś też osoby te są z nami, więc również Państwu bardzo serdecznie dziękuję, że włączyliście się w przygotowanie tej wystawy. W moim przekonaniu pierwszej tak dużej wystawy dotyczącej Stalagu i tak dobrze opisującym to, co się wtedy wydarzyło. Jeszcze raz bardzo serdecznie dziękuję i pozwólcie, Szanowni Państwo, że w podziękowaniu przekażę skromne kwiaty na ręce pani dyrektor i pani kurator. Zapraszam, pani kurator. Dziękuję, pani dyrektor. Dziękuję pani kurator i gratuluję przede wszystkim. Dziękuję państwu.
Grzegorz, zapraszam. Szanowni Państwo, podczas dzisiejszego spotkania dotykamy tematu, który od czasów zakończenia działań II wojny światowej stał się zapomniany i pomijany. Wspomnienia losów jeńców wojennych i ich rodzin były najczęściej przechowywane w domowych archiwach. Zdjęcia i dokumenty wypełniały teczki i albumy skrzętnie chowane w szufladach. Jedni pamiętali, inni chcieli jak najszybciej zapomnieć historię blisko 5-letniej tułaczki, uwięzienia, upodlenia, chorób i rozłąki z bliskimi.
Ladies and gentlemen, during today's event, we shall be considering a topic that has largely become forgotten and overlooked since the end of World War II. Memories of prisoners of war and their families were most often kept in home archives. Photos and documents would fill albums and files carefully stored in drawers. Some survivors remembered, while others wanted to forget as soon as possible the history of nearly 5 years of exile, imprisonment, deprivation, disease and separation from their loved ones.
Muzeum Miasta Malborka w momencie powstania w styczniu 2018 roku przyjęło na siebie bardzo ważną rolę. Rolę upamiętnienia i wyjaśnienia niełatwej do opowiadania historii regionu. Takim tematem było funkcjonowanie na terenie malborskiego Wielbarku obozu jenieckiego Stalag 20B.
Since its creation in January 2018, Malbork Town Museum assumed a very important role of commemoration and explanation of the history of the region, a story that is not told with ease. One such topic was the functioning of the Stalag 20B prisoner of war camp in Willenberg, present time Wielbark, district of Malbork.
Podjęliśmy wezwanie zebrania rozproszonych informacji, kwerent i przygotowania tekstu opowiadających o organizacji obozu, mężczyzn tam uwięzionych, ich codziennym życiu i ogromnej chęci przetrwania. Szybko okazało się, że nie to było dla nas najtrudniejsze. Najcięższym zadaniem okazało się zmierzenie z emocjami, bezpośrednimi wspomnieniami i przeżyciami, świadectwem konkretnych osób, które miały przecież imię, nazwisko i adres.
We have embarked on a challenge of collecting scattered information, conducting queries and preparing texts dealing with the organization of the camp, the men imprisoned there, their everyday life and their great will to survive. It quickly turned out that this task was not the most difficult one that we faced. We realized that the hardest one was to be confronted with the emotions, first-hand memories and ordeals, to face the testimony of individual people who had their own names and unique backgrounds.
Podczas oglądania wystawy zwrócą Państwo na pewno uwagę na pewne malowidło. Mural odnaleziony na ścianie stodoły jednego z komand roboczych w dzisiejszym Nowym Stawie. Malunek przedstawia wnętrze saloniku z palącym się ogniem w kominku, domową ciepłą atmosferą, spokojem i harmonią. Bardzo wymowny przekaz tęsknoty za normalnością. Więcej emocji wywołuje jednak tekst, który głosi, że to właśnie dom jest tym miejscem, na który warto czekać. Ta emocja nadała sens naszym przygotowaniom do wystawy, która opowiada nieznane losy konkretnych ludzi. Wystawy, której tytuł Stalag 20B, historia nieopowiedziana, to hołd złożony ludziom, którzy wierzyli, że swój los wykupią z rąk oprawców za pomocą ciężkiej pracy.
While visiting the exhibition, you will certainly notice a painting. the mural found on the wall of the barn of one of the working parties in Neuteich or Nowy Staw. The painting presents the interior of a living room with burning embers in the fireplace, a warm home atmosphere, one of peace and harmony, a powerful message of longing for normality. However, it is a text stating that home is the place worth waiting for that is the most emotional. This sentiment gave meaning to our preparations for the exhibition, which tells the unknown fate of individual people. The exhibition, titled Stalag 20B, The Untold Story, is a tribute to people who believe that by means of hard work, they would redeem their fate from the hands of their oppressors.
Muzeum Miasta Malborka jako pierwsze podjęło temat Stalagu 20B na tak dużą skalę. Dotychczas ukazało się zaledwie kilka artykułów naukowych i popularno-naukowych, które dotyczyło obozu jenieckiego funkcjonującego w Marienburgu do 1945 roku. Dlatego do zespołu merytorycznego zaproszeni zostali naukowcy, pasjonaci, kolekcjonerzy, którzy od lat zagłębiają wiedzę w tym trudnym temacie.
The Malbork Town Museum is the first one to deal with the subject of Stalag 20B on such an extensive scale. Thus far, only a few scientific and popular science articles have been published concerning the prisoner of war camp that existed in Marienburg until 1945. That is why scientists, enthusiasts and collectors who have been studying this difficult topic for years have been invited to the research team.
Treść wystawy w dużej mierze oparła się o dzienniki i pamiętniki pisane przez jeńców, o korespondencję jeniecką do najbliższych i o opowieści o jeńcach przekazane nam przez dzieci, wnuków i innych członków ich rodzin.
The content of the exhibition was largely based on diaries and memoirs written by the prisoners, on their correspondence with their relatives, as well as stories about prisoners passed on to us by their children, grandchildren and other members of their families.
Praca kuratorska wymagała zatem przede wszystkim zachowania odpowiedniego balansu pomiędzy faktami zapisanymi w dokumentach, a emocjami, którymi przepełnione były pamiątki powziętych do niewoli żołnierzach polskich, brytyjskich, włoskich, francuskich czy serbskich. Przez wystawę poprowadzi Państwa szereg cytatów z korespondencji jenieckiej i dzienników, dzięki którym można lepiej poznać obozowe życie i tęsknotę za utraconą wolnością. Zgromadzone eksponaty przybliżą Państwu obozową codzienność, a całości dopełnią liczby i fakty zawarte na planszach.
The curatorial work called for, above all, the appropriate balance between the facts recorded in the documents and the emotions that filled the mementos of Polish, British, Italian, French and Serbian prisoners of war. A sequence of quotations from prisoner of war correspondence and journals will guide you through the exhibition, helping you become familiar with the life in the camp and the longing for the lost freedom. The exhibits collected will recall the everyday life of the camp, and your experience will be completed by the figures and facts provided on the information boards.
Dzisiejsze spotkanie osób z różnych środowisk, historyków, dyplomatów, lokalnych władz, przedstawicieli stowarzyszeń, osób pielęgnujących pamięć historyczną nie jest przypadkowe. Jestem dumna z faktu, że młode, nieduże miejskie muzeum gości tak znamienitych gości.
Today's gathering of people from various backgrounds, historians, diplomats, local authorities, representatives of associations, and individuals who cultivate historical memory is not accidental. We are proud of the fact that our young small-town museum hosts such distinguished guests.
Moje powitanie wszystkich Państwa jest zarazem podziękowaniem za zaangażowanie w powstawanie wystawy, pomoc w realizacji wielu zadań, wsparcie także finansowe, za dobre słowo, które od pierwszych dni przygotowań płynęło w naszym kierunku.
As I welcome you today at this exhibition, I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude for your commitment to the exhibition, your assistance in various tasks, your support, including financial one, and for all the kind words directed towards our undertaking from the early days of its preparation.
Serdecznie witam przedstawicieli patronów honorowych wystawy, ambasady brytyjskiej w Warszawie, ambasady Francji w Polsce, marszałka województwa pomorskiego.
It is my pleasure to welcome the representatives of honorary patrons of the exhibition, the British Embassy in Warsaw, the French Embassy in Poland, the Marshal of the Pomeranian Voivodeship.
Witam naszych partnerów. Bez Was powstanie wystawy byłoby po prostu niemożliwe. Miasto partnerskie Monheim, nad Renem, Stowarzyszenie Anglo-Polish Society, Muzeum Historyczne Wojskowe w Toruniu, Gminę Miłorac, Gmina Nowy Staw, Polsko-Amerykańską Fundację Upamiętnienia Obozów Jenieckich w Szubinie, Stowarzyszenie Dawna Wozownia w Miłoradzu, firma Eco Malbork, firma Nyborg Mawent Malbork, Przedsiębiorstwo Wodociągów i Kanalizacji w Malborku.
I would like to welcome our partners, without whom the exhibition would not be possible. Our partner town of Monheim am Rhein, the Anglo-Polish Society, the Historical and Military Museum in Toruń, Miłorac Commune, Nowy Staw Commune, the Polish-American Foundation for the Commemoration of Prisoner of War Camps in Szubin, the Dawna Wozownia Association in Miłorac, the ECO Company in Malbork, the Nyborg Mawent Company in Malbork and the Waterworks Company in Malbork.
Bardzo dziękuję za objęcie patronatem medialnych naszych działań przez Radio Gdańsk i Telewizję Polską, program Trzeci Gdańsk.
I would like to thank Radio Gdańsk and Polish Television Channel 3 in Gdańsk for extending their media patronage over our activities.
Powstanie wystawy byłoby niemożliwe bez grantów zewnętrznych. Działania dofinansowano ze środków finansowych Muzeum Historii Polski w Warszawie w ramach programu Patriotyzm Jutra oraz Fundacji Współpracy Polsko-Niemieckiej w Warszawie. Jesteśmy Państwu bardzo wdzięczni za zaufanie.
The exhibition would not be possible without external grants. The activities were co-financed by the Polish History Museum in Warsaw as part of the Patriotism of Tomorrow program and the Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation in Warsaw. We appreciate your trust in us.
Witam wspierające nas władze miasta Malborka, panów burmistrzów, radnych miasta Malborka, radnych Muzeum Miasta Malborka, panów starostów powiatu malborskiego, dyrektora Muzeum Zamkowego w Malborku, przedstawicieli Fundacji Mater Dei z Malborka, kolegów i koleżanki z zaprzyjaźnionych muzeów, przedstawicieli miejskich i powiatowych instytucji, przedstawicieli służb mundurowych, wszystkich naszych przyjaciół i wspierające nas rodziny.
I would like to welcome the authorities of the town of Malbork, mayors, councillors of the town of Malbork, councillors of the Museum of the town of Malbork, starosts of the Malbork County, the director of the Castle Museum in Malbork, representatives of the Mater Dei Foundation from Malbork, the colleagues from our friendly museums, representatives of town and district offices, representatives of uniformed services, and all our friends and families that support us.
Szczególne podziękowania i powitania kieruję do osób, które ciężko pracowały nad powstaniem wystawy i katalogu z komentarzem historycznym, autorów tekstów, darczyńców eksponatów i archiwów rodzinnych, tłumaczy.
Our special words of gratitude go to those who worked hard on the creation of the exhibition and catalogue with a historical commentary, authors of texts, donors of exhibits, and family archives, translators.
Przy każdej takiej okazji zwracam także szczególną uwagę na trud pracy włożony przez pracowników Muzeum Miasta Malborka. To niewielka grupa, która za każdym razem wykazuje się ogromnym poświęceniem. Dziękujemy wszystkim tym, którzy choćby w najmniejszym stopniu pomogli nam świętować dzisiaj otwarcie pięknej wystawy i cieszyć się wydaniem wspaniałego katalogu.
On each such occasion, we also pay special attention to the hard work on the part of the employees of the Museum of the town of Malbork. It's a small group that shows great dedication each time. We would like to thank everyone who helped us celebrate the opening of the exhibition today and enjoy the publication of the brilliant catalogue.
O głos teraz poproszę pana Lukasa Risę, reprezentującego burmistrza miasta partnerskiego Monheim nad Renem oraz doktora Aleksandra Bernera, historyka miejskiego miasta Monheim.
Now I invite to speak Mr. Lukas Riese, the deputy mayor of our twin town of Monheim am Rhein, followed by Dr. Alexander Berner, who's the town historian of the town of Monheim.
I tłumaczenia tych tekstów znajdziecie Państwo w teczkach.
You can find the translations of these texts in the folders you have received on entering the exhibition.
Dear Mr. Mayor, dear Mr. Council President, dear Mrs. Director of the City Museum, dear guests of honor, and dear ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to send you the greetings from our mayor, of Monheim and also the honorary citizen of Malbork, Daniel Zimmermann, whom I represent today as the first vice mayor of our city, Monheim am Rhein. I also want to sincerely thank you on behalf of our city for the cooperation as well as for the invitation to participate in this important project, Stalag 20b, the Untold History. I'm glad to see the result today here in Malbork, and the exhibition is, from my point of view, very successful, and therefore congratulations to all of those who made this success possible. It is important that the history is reappraised, and therefore it is good that history is now being told and made visible to the people, especially because our history separates and connects Poles and Germans alike. It is not possible to have a town twinning without dealing with this history together. The set topic of forced labor workers plays an important role, and therefore we recently launched several initiatives in our town, Monheim am Rhein, to also tell this inglorious part of our city history. One important initiative are the so-called stumbling stones. The laying of the first 11 stumbling stones for Polish forced labor workers was attended as well by a delegation from Malbork 2 years ago in 2019. In total, we speak about 240 Polish citizens who were forced to work in Monheim am Rhein during the Second World War, from in total at least 1,416 forced labor workers. Dr. Alexander Werner, as the historian of our city, will elaborate more about this part of our city history later on. Also here, our town training plays an important role to reach our common goal to tell this important part of our history. Town trainings are also able to bring people together as they do today, and this is something special for Poles and Germans, given the fact that we stand here 76 years after the end of World War II, and all the crimes that were committed by Germans, by our grandparents and great-grandparents, especially in Poland. In this context, the town training between Malbork and Monheim, and also this exhibition, can be seen as a big contribution to understanding and also to reconciliation. Therefore, we are also looking forward to many further exchanges and initiatives between our two cities, which help to overcome prejudices which are still existing about Poles in Germany and about Germans in Poland. One upcoming such exchange is the meeting of the youth councils in our city in 2022, so next year, and we are very glad that the youth council of Malbork will be participating as well, and I hereby would like to invite you, dear Mayor, with a delegation from Malbork to the closing event in our city. Finally, I would like to thank all of you on behalf of the inhabitants of your twin town, Monheim am Rhein, for the opportunity to participate today in this exhibition, Stalag 20b, the Untold History. Thanks a lot.
Dear Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chairman of the City Council, dear Ms. Director of the Town Museum, ladies and gentlemen, the special exhibition Stalag 20b, The Untold History, opens today. This exhibition is certainly an important step on the way to making some of the crimes committed by the National Socialists comprehensible. It is thus part of commemorative work, Erinnerungsarbeit in German. This term describes the effort that must be made to research the past, to communicate it, and to preserve it for the future. Historical commemorative work in the context of the Third Reich is not an easy task. It is labor-intensive. It requires professional distance, but is emotionally moving. Sometimes you earn gratitude, sometimes it arouses displeasure, sometimes it downright hurts. As difficult as this balancing act may be, it is also necessary. It is necessary if we want to achieve a lasting social consensus that says, never again. So it is a matter of publicly coming to terms with the past in order to shape the future. An unimaginable number of people were discriminated against, harassed, persecuted, injured, or murdered on behalf of the German Reich from 1939 to 1945, the years of World War II. In total, an estimated 13 million people were exploited during this period by being deported and forced to work, including foreign civilian workers, prisoners of war, convicts, concentration camp prisoners, men, women, children. The plight of forced laborers is understandably overshadowed by the horrors of the Holocaust. Nevertheless, coming to terms with their history is part of the historical legacy of post-war German society. Let's take a look at how Monheim am Rhein has tried in the past and is currently trying to do commemorative work regarding forced labor. Because Monheim had its own Stalag, which can be attributed to this context. Forced laborers were also used in the so-called Rheingemeinden, which is Monheim, Baumberg, and Hittorf. Between 1939 and 1945, at least 1,460 people had to toil there under partly miserable conditions. The precise differentiation between prisoners of war and civilian forced laborers is no longer possible, because the Nazis quickly changed the status of prisoners of war to that of civilian workers, in order to no longer have to abide by the Geneva Conventions. The forced laborers used in Monheim corresponded to about a quarter of the population living there. Here's an overview of where these people came from. 240 men, women and children from Poland, 180 from the Netherlands, 125 from Belgium, 94 from France, 320 from Russia, 279 from Ukraine, 172 from Italy and 6 from Serbia. These people were housed in various farms and camps, including the locally important Stammlager 1313. This Stalag was much smaller than Stalag 20B, but an important local distribution camp for forced laborers. Monheim am Rhein is dealing with the history of the forced laborers employed there as part of its own history, as well as part of the history of forced labor in general. Today, it does this in various ways. As elsewhere, it took quite a while before the people of Monheim were ready to come to terms with this extremely unpleasant history. For the first decades after the war, there was an eloquent silence about the crimes committed there in the name of National Socialism. Most Germans claimed not to have known about the crimes. It was not until the turn of the 1970s that the first forms of commemoration began to take shape. Surprisingly, the initiative came from the local economy, which had profited so much from the forced laborers. 2 gravesites set up by the Pötz and Sand Company pay tribute to the victims, and a memorial stone stands as a monument to them. The text of the memorial stone is certainly debatable, because the prominent opening phrase, quote, "To our loyal Russian employees killed in the bombing of 21st February 1945, erected in gratitude by the Pötz and Sand Company," end of quote, seems completely out of date. The term employees obscures the status of the fallen as forced laborers. The adjective loyal suggests that the forced laborers would also have had the option of leaving the company of their own accord, which in fact would probably have been punishable by death towards the end of the war, especially for so-called Eastern workers. Finally, the gratitude shown must be described as cynical, because no gratitude is owed to forced labor and exploitation, but an apology, compensation, and so much more. Today, this text seems like an attempt to clear the company of a historical debt without really acknowledging it. However, one has to give credit to Pötz and Sand for speaking out publicly about this part of its past, whereas most other companies remained silent. In 1995, a public commemoration of the victims of the war took place in the town hall of Monheim. The speech given by a contemporary witness on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the end of the war also mentions the victims of forced labor. However, the admission of concrete own responsibility was omitted in favor of a plenary indulgence. The German people had been the victims of the Nazis themselves. The speaker thus joined a widespread approach to commemorating the horrors of the Third Reich. Everyone was a victim of the Nazis: Jews, forced laborers, the German people. This begs the question, who were the perpetrators? 26 years later, in 2021, a commentary on this speech was published that criticizes the positions formulated there from the perspective of today's historical research. At the same time, however, it also shows that a different approach to commemorating the atrocities of the Third Reich would have been possible as early as 1995. Since the publication of this commentary, there has been movement in some circles of the Monheim society on the question of how the victims of the Third Reich could be remembered with dignity. This alone is good, as questioning traditional forms of remembrance and commemoration prevents them from becoming encrusted. Other forms of commemoration dedicated to the victims of forced labor go back to initiatives by pupils. Pupils of the Peter Ustinov Comprehensive School arranged for the installation of a memorial plaque on the wall of the Catholic cemetery, in the earth of which rest 7 forced laborers killed in a bombing raid on 21st February 1945. The plaque commemorates the, quote, more than 1,400, end of quote, forced laborers who had to toil in Monheim. The purpose of remembrance, commemoration, is also served by the numerous so-called Stolpersteine, stumbling stones, made by the artist Gunter Demnig, which the city had laid in the pavements in Monheim and Bamberg. The brass-surfaced paving stones individually commemorate the victims of National Socialism in the places where they lived or had to work, by preserving and making public their name, year of birth, fate, and, if known, date of death. For the commemoration of collective suffering, for example in connection with Stammlagern, Gunter Demnig has designed so-called stumbling thresholds, Stolperschwellen. One of these thresholds is located in front of Klappertorstraße 47 in Monheim and commemorates Stalag 1313, which was very probably located there. To ensure that commemoration is not exhausted with the laying of the stumbling stones and thresholds, the city has organized the maintenance of these objects as sponsorships, which are taken on by student groups, associations, but also private individuals. Stumbling stone tours can be booked via the city's homepage, which guarantee expert guidance during the exploration of the historical sites. A 70-page brochure contextualizes the Stolpersteine and Stolperschwellen in Monheim. Other forms of commemoration and remembrance can be found, for example, in publications about forced labor in Monheim, or an exhibition project of the City Archive, which unfortunately had to be transferred to an online format due to the pandemic in 2020. At the annual central commemoration of the victims of National Socialism on 9th November, the people of Monheim also remember the prisoners of war and forced laborers who were deported to Monheim against their will and had to work there. A municipal office is of particular importance, whose activities include keeping forms of remembrance and commemoration up to date and developing new ones. Since 2020, it is being supported by a municipal historian. The commemorative measures in Monheim are thus initiated and carried out both by civil society and by the municipal administration. It is particularly important that forms of commemoration are regularly scrutinized, on the one hand to prevent them from degenerating into routine, and on the other hand to check their topicality and appropriateness. The conditions in Monheim give reason to hope that this will be successful in the long term. In the field of commemoration, cooperation across borders is important. It ensures new perspectives on phenomena that give the impression of being familiar. New interpretations emerge in the process. The phenomena of forced labor and war captivity are particularly suitable for working across borders. Both are about people who were deported from their homeland to work in another country, or who were caught in the war and interned in a place far from their homeland. The exhibition Stalag 20B, The Untold History, makes a major contribution to the necessary coming to terms with this dark part of the history of Europe and the world. It illuminates the story of numerous prisoners of war whose freedom, health and lives were put at risk in the Stalag and on their way to the West. We in Monheim were very pleased to be asked to contribute a little to the success of this great undertaking. For this, we thank you very much. We wish the exhibition and the Marburg City Museum every success and, of course, lots of visitors. Thank you very much.
Szanowni Państwo, wiem, że są osoby, które chciałyby zabrać głos, więc to jest ten moment. Zapraszam. Z Państwa pierwszy. Jeśli nie ma takich osób, to też dobrze, bo możemy zająć się już zwiedzaniem. Szanowni Państwo, przy wejściu otrzymaliście takie bileciki, karneciki z cyfrą, która przyporządkowuje Państwa do poszczególnych grup zwiedzania wystawy. Grupę z cyfrą 1 oprowadzi dr Jan Daniluk. Grupę z cyfrą 2 oprowadzi kuratorka wystawy Beata Grudziecka. Grupę z cyfrą 3 Bernard Jesionowski. Grupę z cyfrą 4 Sylwia Kaszuba. Przyporządkowanie do poszczególnych grup pozwoli nam zachować względy sanitarne. Osoby czekające na swoją kolej do oglądania wystawy zapraszam na poczęstunek tutaj na sali konferencyjnej. Życzę Państwu dobrych wrażeń podczas wizyty na naszej wystawie.
Ladies and gentlemen, on entering the exhibition, you have received exhibition passes in the form of tickets, each bearing a number, and this number will direct you to the people who will show you around the exhibition. The group with number 2 will be shown around by Dr. Jan Daniluk.
Dr Jan Daniluk już tam czeka.
With ticket holders with number 2 will be shown around by Ms. Beata Grudziecka, the curator of the exhibition. Group number 3 will be shown around by Mr. Bernard Jesionowski, and group number 4 by Ms. Sylwia Kaszuba. The division into these groups will enable us to abide by the health and sanitary regulations. For this reason, those waiting for joining their particular groups are welcome to visit the reception room, where you will find a small buffet. Thank you, and we hope that you will have a great experience of visiting this exhibition.